My name is Boris Dobra, and the chart that you see behind me here, we are going to demonstrate that the Old Testament stands as the greatest historical book in the world, and there is nothing that comes close to it. This work is based on the work of Martin Anstey, which has become a contention among many scholars in the world today, and the work of Ptolemy, who brings in the 10 kings of the Persian reign to 205 years, where the Old Testament sees the Persian reign as only 126 years. So we will go through step by step explaining the chart. Martin Anstey and Philip Morey, Martin Anstey finished his work in 1923, and he maintained that there was an 82-year inflation in the inflation of years in the Persian period, while Philip Morey had it correct, which was exactly 79 years, which we will show how these two men come to 82-year inflation and a 79-year inflation. Now we'll go to the lines here. The lines are done in both green and red. The green line represents the Old Testament chronology of years, and the red line represents the Ptolemaic time, which is the 10 kings which are now in the British museums, which span, which gives us 10 kings for the Persian reign right up to Cyrus the Great at 536 BC. Now the problems that we find in this contention is that we recognise and accept that right up until Alexander the Great, 331, all the dates are correct here because the Romans had Olympiads, and you could ascertain up to Alexander the Great exactly the 331 that these years were correct. But when we go from 331 right up to 536 BC or 457 BC, there are no records available, and the only link that we have is either the prophecy of the 490-year prophecy, or we have Ptolemy's kings, which tried to validate their line of years as 205 years for the Persian period, where the Old Testament allows only 126 for the Persian reign. Now, how do we come to the conclusion that there is only 126? We'll talk about the Old Testament chronology first, and how do they come to the 126 years for the Persian reign. Now, in the prophecies of Daniel, there was a prediction made that there would be 490-year prophecy from the going forth to restore and build Jerusalem to the Messiah the Prince. And then there was a 62 weeks, which is 434 years, brings us 483 years right to the date of the Messiah. So there are 483 slots, or 483 years from 457 BC to the baptism of Jesus, which is AD 26. Now, where the problem lies is that where the connection lies and helps the Old Testament, beside the 490-year block or link that we have in that prophecy, we also have a prophecy by Jeremiah the prophet. Now, Jeremiah the prophet, in the 25th chapter of Jeremiah, he predicted that there would be 70 years from his prediction that the children of Israel who disobeyed God would go 70 years in Babylon. Now, this is the most sacred part of where the profane chronology meets the Bible chronology, and it is recorded in the 25th chapter of Jeremiah in the first verse, and it states there that in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, that was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, and so this is where the problem lies. You have this 70 years. Which is connected to the 490 years, which gives us 560 years detailed out in the Old Testament, and you really don't need any other support to show us these dates, because they were prophetically recorded, inspired by God, prophesied by God, and recorded by Jeremiah and Daniel in Daniel 9. Now, the question is that most of the Near Eastern studies and all those who profess to support Ptolemy have not thought it through very carefully, simply for the reasons that the children of Israel who disobeyed God, and Jeremiah told them in chapter 25 that they would go 70 years in Babylon. Now, if they're serving 70 years in Babylon's captivity, 70, there it is there. If they are serving 70 years in Babylon's captivity, how do they go to build the temple? At 536 BC to 516, according to Ptolemy's canon, which brings Cyrus at 536, how do they get out of prison to go and build the temple? That is not possible. It cannot be reconciled. No matter what you try to do with secular history, with all the Near Eastern studies, these two cannot combine. They cannot fit together. And so therefore, what happens then, if, for example, if this took place over here at 600, according to the Ptolemaic time, then Jeremiah would have had to prophesy 140 years, but he didn't. He prophesied only 70 years in Babylon. So what we need here is, sorry to say, what we call drastic surgery. The drastic surgery means that we then have to eliminate those false years. According to Anstey, they never really existed. They were inflated by the historian who was Claudius Ptolemy. He was a 2nd century astronomer in Alexandria, and he, although his planetary motions, like the Earth was the centre and all the planets revolved around it, his 10 kings, which are in the British museums, dug up by archaeologists, and he gives the reign of the 10 kings, which is 205 years, and they span from 331 BC after Alexander. You got Darius, Arsus, Artaxerxes III, Artaxerxes II, Darius II, and then you have 7th year of Artaxerxes Longomanus, and then you have Xerxes, and then you have Darius Hepstes and Cambius, and then you have Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, his son, going up to 605 years. So there you have that 205 years from 331 BC. It comes to 605 right up here. The problem also with this date is that we know that Nehemiah and Mordecai were captured by Nebuchadnezzar, and they also returned to Jerusalem after they served 70 years in Babylon. They returned to rebuild, help, and bring the reforms in Jerusalem. But the problem is that because when you take the 597 when Nehemiah was captured and Mordecai at 586, this makes them, at their reforms, when they carry out their reforms in 409, you have them almost 190 years of age. Now, people did not live 190 years of age at 500 BC. They lived the normal 70, maybe they lived to 100, 110, but not to 190. So this confuses all the narratives of the book of Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah, who show that Queen Esther, who was the niece to Mordecai, marries Darius Hepstes, or King Ahasuerus, at the dedication of the temple, but she cannot marry him if she's 110 years old. She can marry them if she's, say, 30 years of age or 25, and this is where the surgery has to take place. So there we have the conversion, because there is only 70 years from Jeremiah's prophecy to the going forth and to restore, because this is where the 70 years expires. Now Daniel was very concerned. He was studying the books of Jeremiah, and it says as he was studying the 70 years of Jeremiah in Daniel 9, it talks about the 70 years, and it was the 2nd year of Darius, which was who reigned 2 years with Cyrus, and then the decree is made because Daniel is concerned. He prays to God, what will happen to the city of Jerusalem, to the temple that lay in desolation for 70 years? And Daniel was so concerned about it. He was the prophet of God. And of course, Daniel is the great figure that stands in that period, because he was there when the big image was built by Nebuchadnezzar. He was there when they were thrown into the fiery furnace. He was there when Belshazzar, which was the son Nebuchadnezzar, who took all the golden vessels and had a drunken debauchery, and they had a great feast, and of course the writing came on the wall, and of course Daniel was the great wise man who was recognized as the Spirit of God dwelt in him, that he could explain what that writing on the wall meant. And of course this is all taking place exactly at the end of Belshazzar's life, and there is Cyrus the Great and the Medo-Persian has come to Babylon. They are now overtaking Babylon, and Daniel is there, and of course he reveals what the words meant writing on the wall. And of course now God was so concerned of the Old Testament about this prophecy, because God predicted it in Daniel that there would be 490 years, and 483 years slots were to the Messiah, the Prince. So God went so far as to make sure that Cyrus, his servant, who was appointed by God, but not only that he was appointed by God, he was appointed 200 years in the books of Isaiah 44 and 45 before he was even born. So he was named as Cyrus. And of course Daniel knew these books, he studied them, and of course what does God say that he will do through his servant Cyrus? In 44 and 45 it says that he will subdue nations before him, he would open the doors, the gates will not be shut. In other words, when they went into a drunken festive debauchery, they forgot to close the gates, and the bronze gates were broken down. Babylon was regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was 17 miles long in square. It was 300 feet high, 300 something feet high. The walls on top were 70, 80 feet across. You could ride 4 chariots across, and this was regarded almost as an impregnable city that you couldn't get in. But of course God prepared Cyrus because of what Belshazzar was doing, because he knew about his father's dreams and the image and how his father was sent as a beast in the field, and God reinstated him, but he neglected all that. And of course Cyrus then talks about him, and God says his shepherd, he will build Jerusalem and he will build a city. Now the Ptolemies say no, he will not build the city, he will only build the temple, and then there will be a gap. And so because the temple according to the Ptolemaic time is built from 536 to 516, 20 years, then what we have is nothing takes place for 58 years. And then of course we have the decree to build the walls and the city. But God already said that Cyrus would build not only the temple, but he would build the city as well. And so we read, if we read in Isaiah 45:13, it says, I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways, and he shall build my city. Now, this is plain, simple, straight language. He will build my city. So Cyrus not only builds the temple together with the city, but there it all starts. And then we will now show how, because the right kings fall in place, over here when you get to Artaxerxes Longomanus I, the prophecy indicates and gives reasons that it will take 49 years to build the city and the walls and bring about the reforms in Jerusalem. And of course when you go up to the top line, what happens is that Artaxerxes comes to his end at the 34th year, and there's a shortfall of 29 years to fulfill the prophecy here. So whatever event occurs on that Ptolemaic line, it is completely out of sequence. It makes, as I said before, Nehemiah, Mordecai 190 years of age. It makes Esther the Queen of Beauty, who marries King Darius Hepstes at almost 110. But when the surgical procedure takes place, and we now have to convert what are the true dates of Cyrus's decree, because Cyrus comes exactly 70 years after their Cyrus is coming. And of course, from here, we only have 483 slots, which brings us, first of all, to the baptism of Jesus. But when it comes to Alexander the Great, at 331, which we don't need any more records, because they are all there by the Roman alleging. And so we count back, and what do we have for the reign of the Persian kings? We have exactly 126 years. When you go to the Ptolemaic line, of course, these dates increase the Ptolemaic line and the Ptolemaic reign of the Persian kings by 205. And these cannot be accommodated for by the records found in the books of Ezra, the books of Esther, the books of Nehemiah, and also the book of Daniel, which is most important, because Daniel says from the going forth to restore and build Jerusalem. And of course, Jerusalem must start here, and Cyrus starts from here, because Cyrus, of course, 70 years expires by Jeremiah, exactly 70, and that's where Cyrus starts. Now we come to the building. There are these are the records. These are the ANSI's records. You can pick them up. We've only just ledgered them down to show you how 82 events perfectly fulfill every single one. Not one is out of place. And they only fulfill when Cyrus comes at his true date. When they come over, if they come over here where Ptolemy puts them, not one of those fulfill in order. So, first of all, in the first year of Cyrus, what is given? The first year of Cyrus, according to Ezra, it says, in the first year that Cyrus of Persia was emperor, the Lord made what he had said through the prophet Jeremiah come true. What did God say through the prophet Jeremiah would come through? God said through the prophet Jeremiah that they would be 70 years in Babylon, 70 years in Babylon, and then they would all go back to their homeland to rebuild their temple, their city, from that period. And this is the command of Cyrus, emperor of Persia: the Lord God of heaven made me ruler over the whole world and has given me responsibility to build him the temple. Now, he is in the books of Isaiah. It says he will build a city. That's Isaiah 45:13. He will build my city. But in the book of Ezra, the first chapter, and it says he will build my temple. So we can categorically say that decree which Cyrus made would have included both the temple and the city. All this information that Daniel knew about as he read the old records of the books of Isaiah, and he was there together with Cyrus, and of course, being an astute prophet as he is, he would have told Cyrus, Cyrus, your name is already written in the books. 200 years before, God has ordained you, and he has said exactly what you will do. And of course, it would have been no problem. Cyrus would have issued the decree to build what? To build both the temple. Now, when you come down to reading about the stopping of when they went back, the 42,000 went back with Mordecai, with Nehemiah. They had all the materials prepared to build the temple and the city, and this was hampered for a building of the city for right up until the second year of Darius. There he is there. They stopped it right until the second year of Darius. And then, of course, letters were sent backward and forward, and they says, let the work of the house alone and let them build it. So they went ahead and finished it. And of course, we see that it is finished. And where is it finished? It is completed in the 6th year of who? Not Artaxerxes Longomanus, because that throws it all out. But it is completed in the right king, which falls in the right order, because this is God's prophetic chart. It's telling them what was going to happen in the future. And so he builds the temple in the 6th year, and of course in the 7th year, what happens? Of course, when you build a temple, people don't usually wait 58 years to dedicate it like they're trying to tell us up here. They dedicate it within 1 year. And so the dedication takes place. And at that dedication, Queen Esther is meeting Darius Hepsestes, and the marriage is going to take place. And he hands her out the scepter, and of course Haman, the wicked person, is preparing to have the Jews slaughtered, including Esther, including Mordecai. And of course, when this is revealed to Darius Hepsestes, Haman loses his head, and then the Jews are saved. And of course, there was still, we know from according to the books of Daniel, that they would be hampering to build the city and the temple for 20 years. And so what we have is now this is all completed, it's all dedicated, the dedication takes place, the marriage takes place, Esther marries, or Queen Esther marries King Ahasuerus, who's known, these are synonymous names because these are just titles. These kings could be called Artaxerxes or Xerxes or Ahasuerus or Darius. When these people pick up the cuneiform tablets, they try to decipher which king is which. They have no real starting point or finishing point to their chronology, and yet they go about to try and say, we will correct the Old Testament. And of course, we know that this cannot be so. And we then come down to the wonderful things that happens with the reforms, but there is still the broken walls. Jeremiah is so concerned and he's upset, and he's praying to God, and his face is downtrodden, he feels sad, and of course Darius Hepsestes sees him that he's very sad, and he asks him why. And of course Nehemiah realises that the walls are still broken down. Part of the walls are still broken down. And Darius Hepsestes or Artaxerxes, or whatever name, they had 3 names, 3 titles, he gives him letters. These are not decrees to build the wall, because when the temple was stopped here and the letters were sent to Artaxerxes to stop the wall, if you read the books of Ezra, the 3rd, 4th chapter, what Darius does, he goes to re-examine the records of Cyrus, because it was Cyrus's decree that issued forth both the building of the temple and the city. And before he could even recommence the building of the city and the temple, he has to research the archives in Babylon, and there he finds Cyrus's record, and then they command them to go ahead and finish the temple. Now, the 20th year, Nehemiah repairs the walls in 52 days. Who is going to believe that the walls and the city that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar 70 years before, that this is some sort of a decree to go and build the walls in the city? That's not possible, because in 52 days, what Nebuchadnezzar destroyed when he besieged Jerusalem 3 times, it was ravaged, it was broken down completely, and they had to rebuild it, and they were rebuilding the walls and the city and the houses for 20 years and even longer. And of course Nehemiah repairs the walls, and then of course he becomes governor of Jerusalem for 12 years, and in those 12 years he carries out all the reforms that took place. They were marrying heathens, they were profaning the Sabbath, everything was going wrong. And of course Nehemiah, being 12 years of governor, he then goes to visit Artaxerxes in Babylon. He visits him at the 32nd year. It aligns with the 49 years predicted. And at the 32nd year, he comes back to Jerusalem on the end, and he completes within 2 years those final reforms, and that brings the close of the records of the Old Testament. And that completes exactly 49 years after the second year of the reforms. The close of the books of the records of the Old Testament are found exactly where Anstey, the great scholar, Philip Murray, the great scholar, depicted in their wonderful books, The Romance of Bible Chronology by Anstey and The Wonders of Bible Chronology. And step by step, all these events are shown and proven to be correct. But of course, all those people for 400 years deciphering the cuneiform tablets are pushing their wheelbarrow with Ptolemy's canon. But where does it lead them? Nowhere, because they are all out of date, every single one. And so what are we to believe? Are we to believe the records of an astrologer? Well, we can say that the first 5 kings that Claudius Ptolemy worked out, because he was a great mathematician, and he had records in Alexandria of what was happening, and he was able to work out some of the Persian kings correctly, and those 5 first Persian kings all come in order. There's only 6 of them up to Alexander the Great. But it is these latter kings that are dubious, that have been inflated. Anstey actually says that these years, these 79 false years which start here and they enter into the 5 kings, he maintains the sun never actually shone upon them. We can agree with that simply because God, who made the prophecy of the 490 years, ordained it right from the early stages, had King Cyrus prepared to support him all the way in the fulfillment of this prophecy. God, who controls and causes and numbers the stars, those stars and those planetary motions are not out to the tune, no matter how much those who claim that we can establish these things by eclipses, to say that the planetary motions are out by 79 years compared to the prophecy. Both the prophecy of the 490 years and the planetary motions are all perfectly working together. And so we have this wonderful chronology chart which shows us that we are here by God's appointed time, and that we are saved because God has already prepared hundreds of years in advance how the Messiah would come. Now, how did Anstey and Moray come to the year 3,589 Anhom years from the creation of Adam? Simply because when they did their chronology work, and if you can come with me here, how they work out this wonderful year connection. For example, if a king reigned 40 years and 4 months, and that's his 4 months, he's there, the whole year is given to that king, the complete year. And so there is no counting of months, there's no counting of days, there's no bits and pieces. So the king who may have started together with that king, his first year regarded as his ascension year. So you have no gaps, no months, no fractions. They are perfect years tied in one with another all the way along. And so when Anstey did his work, you can see here carefully, if we hone in here, you will see how he numbers his years. 1, 12, 28, 17, 15. All the years are connected. And they can simply be connected because there's no fractions. The fractions that are there, if there's a fraction of 4 months, it's given as a full year to that person. And so the fraction is regarded as a full year, and this person's fractions down here are eliminated, and so he gets a full year. So there's no way of escaping that every year can be connected from Genesis right through to, so both Anstey, who did his 300 pages of dissertation and 187 charts, step by step he slowly brings us to 3589 Anhom years. Anstey did not want to go into the discussion of whether the crust of the earth was created in Genesis 1 to 4, but he talks about from the time that God created Adam. This is the period, and this is the chronology of the years of the patriarchs and the prophecies that relate to them. And so Anstey comes to the same conclusion. He did a work which is a shorter version, easy to read. You can pick it up on the internet or Google. it's called The Wonders of the Bible. It's easy, it wouldn't take you more than 2 or 3 hours to read it, and you will see that beautiful connecting line. Now, where Anstey made a slight little slip, which doesn't alter very much any of these charts, when Anstey came to 3,589 Anaheim years of the Bible, he then had the prophecy of the 490 years. But the prophecy to Jesus at his baptism is only 483 steps, or 483 slots of years. So what happened is Anstey brought the 483 years to the death of Jesus. So if he brought the first 69 years to the death of Jesus, he then had to count back 483 years. But when he counted back 483 years, he then had to brand his 3589 to 454. And so what you get in Anstey's work, he declares that the decree of Cyrus is at 454. But when Moray looked at his work, and of course he regarded Anstey's work as the greatest work in the world, he then went and saw that Anstey made a slight little error. That 483 years he should have brought only to the baptism of Jesus. Had he brought it to the baptism of Jesus, when you count back 483 slots or 483 years, where does it bring you? It brings you exactly to 457. And so the conversion of Cyrus from 536, which are the false years inflated, which then must come back to his true date, the prophecy perfectly fulfills, and there you have 457. These two links, the 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah, converting here at 457 Cyrus's true decree, the 490-year prophecy, or the 483 to the baptism of Jesus, stands like the rock of Gibraltar. It stands like Mount Everest. It needs no other support. It doesn't need Ptolemy. It doesn't need anybody else, because this is God's true history before his death, his accurate history, his chronological history before his death. Now, my own church made some mistakes in this chronology. They wanted to show how they could marry Daniel 8 and Daniel 9 together, and they adopted Ptolemy's canon of Cyrus being at 536 BC, but not being students of the Bible, they forgot that there was a 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah in this from 457 to 536. And therefore, how could the Jews gone back to build the temple at 536, as I said before, when they had this 70-year problem, when they had this 70-year which was prophesied, which stands there, which cannot be removed, and therefore, of course, Ptolemy was endorsed by Mrs. White. Of course, she adopted the 79-year problem, although they maintain the inspiration came from heaven. Of course, when they married these two prophecies together, it shows their whole foundation fell apart, because their whole superstructure from the beginning was wrong. And of course, when Anstey, Moray and Cooper presented, Mrs. White wasn't really responsible for that, because she died in 1914, so she just copied the mistakes of Ptolemy and says that that God endorsed Ptolemy. Well, God may have used him, but certainly his whole work was not properly endorsed. And of course, the latter people after Mrs. White in 1914, what did they do? When Anstey came along and when Moray came along, they rubbished their work and put it on the scrap heap. Instead of endorsing this most magnificent work, where is it today? Simply because this is a pretty hard subject, so most people don't do this in-depth study, but this shows that Moray, these were the true beacons of light, the true men of chronology, the true defenders of the Holy Scripture. And of course, David Cooper, the great Professor David Cooper, his book, The Messiah First Coming Scheduled, he supports this wonderful work. And of course, Keith Moxon also did a great work in working out this wonderful prophecy. And so now we have it today. This was put to 70 universities to study this. 3 of them said 10 years ago, they came back to me, they said they will restudy it. Never ever came back. They will never come back because they can't. If they're going to defend Ptolemy, they might as well, they can go another 100 years and they won't want to talk about it. And so what we've done here, we want to demonstrate where we stand in the scheme of things. Jesus was baptized at AD 26. So how do we have Jesus at 30 years of age if he's baptized, if he's regarded from the time that he was born to AD when he was baptized, AD 26. But what happens is this also corroborates that the New Testament is correct, because Luke says that he was about 30 years of age. When the records were made in the book of Luke that it was the 14th year of Tiberius, Tiberius had already reigned 4 years with his father Augustus. And so when they looked back, they had to put the birth of Jesus 4 years backward, which was called the BCE, before the Common Era. But this doesn't change anything. All it puts is back. This doesn't create more or less years. All it shows is that Jesus was truly 30 years of age when he was baptized, because when you take the 4 years BC before he was born plus the 26, where does it come to? Exactly what Luke says. He was 30 years of age. He dies in the midst of the last week, fulfills the prophecy to the letter, and that's why we were able to have the resurrected Christ, because every time they wanted to kill him, he says, my hour is not yet come, my hour is not yet come, simply because Jesus quoted the prophet Daniel. And 3 times in the writings of Daniel, he is called the most beloved. Simply, and even Mary was only called the most beloved once. But Daniel was, because he was the man who was responsible for the writings of the 490 years. He was connected with Cyrus, and of course Jesus was able to refer to him because he was the great prophet. And those who try to say that his work was 2nd century, written in the 2nd century, where are they going with their work? Up the creek as well. And so what we have here now is 3,589 years. There it is there. And we then have from there, that is to the birth of Jesus, we have 4,042 years. So we connect 4,042 years to 2017. So how many years do we have from the creation of Adam? We have exactly 6,062, which means that we have entered 62 years in the 7th millennium. Should God decide, like he did to Noah, he works in sevens, so 70 years of captivity, 40 years in the wilderness. God does work in numbers. And so he gave 7 days of grace to the antediluvian world. The gates were left open, the doors were left open, massive big doors. The elephants had to go through them. No one walked in. The angel of God closed the doors, and grace and mercy was finished. Should God in his eternal mercy give us 70 years of grace after the 6,000 years, because we've now entered 6,062 in the 7th millennium, that's only 8 years away. We don't know what could happen in the next 8 years. Could there be a world war? Could there be atomic warfare? Could the disintegration of this whole earth take place? Could Jesus return? We are living in serious times. That's why God is trying to inspire us to read this wonderful work of Anstey and Moray and recapture the wonderful history and the prophecy of the Old Testament. The reason why I've placed this picture up here above our chart is it was given to me about 10 years ago. This is the story of a Chinaman who was deeply religious but was disturbed in his religious experience. He takes the picture of the snow, he comes home and he develops the picture, and of course when he develops the picture he sees the face of Jesus in it. Now I don't know if you people have been listening to me now for the last 30 minutes, were you able to capture the face of Jesus? There you have it. You have his beard, you have this side of his face shown, you have his top eye here, and then you have his eye here, and his eyelid and his eyelashes there, and that's part of his nose coming down, part of his chin, that's his beard coming. And as you look there centrally, you will find Jesus. So by faith, we find Jesus, but he's given us a great help in the mathematical prophecies of the Old Testament, that while he expects us to go by faith and trust in him, he's given us the sure work of the prophetic readings of the Old Testament. And these works stand head and shoulders above every other book of the world, and never will they come even close to it.